You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself. Galileo. It's time for science, and it's time to talk about cross-cutting concepts and sense-making discussions. Our guests in this episode are Dr. Samantha Messier and professional learning specialist Leslie Lausten. Dr. Samantha Messier is a retired educator and biologist from Boulder, Colorado. She served as Director of Standards and Instructional Support for the Colorado Department of Education and in multiple roles for the Boulder Valley School District, including Science Director and Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services and Equity. We talk about cross-cutting concepts and making sense of data, with discussing how one of the most critical components of a science learning experience for a student is making sense of what they've experienced in the classroom. We also cover how those cross-cutting concepts provide connections across multiple disciplines of science, and also how teachers might apply cross-cutting concepts to their local context to give students immediate and concrete pieces that relate to their everyday lives and that science is literally everywhere. Leslie A. Lausten has a rich background in science instruction. She taught multiple elementary grades, was a literacy coach and science lead teacher for over 30 years in Virginia. Currently, she's the East Foss Professional Learning Specialist and enjoys helping teachers implement best practices into their science classrooms through meaningful experiences and sense-making. We continue the cross-cutting concepts and sense-making conversation, beginning with discussing how sense-making is something many folks just don't understand the importance of when teaching a lesson, and demystifying cross-cutting concepts. How are we already doing those things in other disciplines, and how can we transfer that to science? And we cover what teachers new to sense-making will want to think about when beginning. Well, it's time for science, and it is time to dive deep into the cross-cutting concepts and making sense of data with Dr. Sam Messier of the Boulder Valley School District in Colorado. Dr. Messier was the SIS Director of Colorado Department of Education and a vast resume of other things, is now retired, but is here to talk to us about cross-cutting concepts and how they look over different grade levels, and to give you some tips on facilitating students through making meaning of their data, which can be one of the great challenges for teachers at the elementary level. So here to help us go through that mire is Dr. Sam Messier. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I would love to just start with, in general, the concept of how sense-making and cross-cutting concepts, what they mean to you and how they overlap. So why don't we talk about that first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the most critical components of a science learning experience for a student is making sense of what they've experienced in the classroom. And usually when we think about that as educators, we think about aiming that towards that specific performance expectation that's in the NGSS. And that performance expectation, if you unpack it and you look at it closely, almost always weaves together some disciplinary core idea, which is kind of the science idea, and then the practice that the student is applying, but also this idea of these cross-cutting concepts, which are really big, deep, powerful ideas that cut across multiple disciplines of science. And we see them come up again and again and again. And I think part of the reason that those are so important is that they really provide connections across different disciplines in science, where, ultimately, we want students to be able to transfer their understanding that they get from a science learning experience to a new context. And that makes those concepts stickier over time, right? If you can apply it to another context, then you're able to hold on to that idea for a long time. You're able to refine that idea over time. You're able to use it in multiple situations to solve different kinds of problems. And I think part of the reason that cross-cutting concepts do that for us is that they help to build conceptual frameworks. I often go back in my thinking as a science educator to the book How People Learn from a couple decades ago, which I think still has some very powerful ideas. And one of those is that in order for students to really develop a deep understanding, they need to build these sort of conceptual frameworks So these frameworks serve as kind of an arranging system, a filing cabinet for the ideas that we acquire. And when we have a filing cabinet, we have a place to put an idea, we can go back and retrieve it later much more easily.
Hmm.
And so that idea, I think, is a really important one for helping students organize their thinking and building long lasting, deep conceptual knowledge.
I know
And
that. Oh, I'm sorry. Keep
oh, no,
continuing.
no, go ahead.
I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say, I know that cross-cutting concepts are all through FOSS and all the things we do, but how does that
Absolutely.
change? When you start this, we go K to 6 elementary.
Hmm. Hmm.
How does that change over time? How do you start with in kindergarten, and what does it end up being?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a great question. Because when I think about, I was reflecting for myself about like what's one of the most powerful moments in my own learning experiences around seeing a cross cutting concept and really having that aha moment and understanding it. For me, it came when I was in college and when I was taking a biochemistry class. So I'm actually going to start sort of like, what does it look like really far along, right? Like when someone's in college, they're in their late teens, early 20s, and they're experiencing a specialty course like biochemistry, right?
Mhm.
And the thing that I really remember from that course, which just struck me with this incredible moment of awe and appreciation for science, is the Bohr effect. So the Bohr effect is what happens with a molecule of hemoglobin when it's floating around in your bloodstream and it's changing its shape based on the pH of your blood.
Hmm.
And that change in its shape or configuration, its 3D shape, allows it to either hold on to an oxygen molecule, grab it, hold onto it, and carry it for a while, or it allows it to let go of that oxygen
Hmm.
molecule and release it into the cells. And so it's really cool. As the CO2 builds up in your blood, it becomes more acidic
Hmm.
and it favors a shape that's going to let go of the oxygen.
Hmm.
And then as the CO2 goes down, your blood becomes less acidic and it favors a shape that's going to grab the oxygen and hold on.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, that's how breathing gets oxygen to everything in our bodies. That is incredible. And
Wow.
it's amazing that evolution could produce this beautiful, complex molecule with this 3D shape that responds to its environment in that way and allows us to do what we need to do.
Hmm.
Um, Now, that's way too advanced for a kindergartner, right? Like that's not that's
I'm barely grabbing it now. I think it's awesome.
and what that's an example of in cross-cutting concepts is structure and function. So how does structure of something facilitate its function? How does its shape, the way it's made, affect what it can do? And that's a powerful concept that you can take all the way back. And if you think about what that looks like in more basic terms, you think about an example that I use a lot is bird beaks. So you think about, you go out and observe birds. Different birds have very different shaped beaks. And those beaks are adapted for different kinds of foods that birds might eat, right? So I once had a person tell me that if you ever really want to understand structure and function, imagine a duck swooping down out of the sky and grabbing a rabbit with its feet and ripping it apart with its bill. It doesn't work, right? So a
Maybe in a
duck's
cartoon, but that's about it.
so a duck's bill is adapted to, get stuff out of the mucky mud of a
Hmm.
pond. And a hawk or an eagle has a much different bill that's adapted. It's sharp. It's able to like really pull things apart and eat them the way a predator would.
Hmm. So that's a great way. I break it down to the simplest parts, and then that's what they build on as they go through the programs. I think that's great. Um,
Actually, yeah, absolutely. So structure and function is a powerful concept. It exists in these simpler ideas and in these more complex ideas. It's the same concept, the same cross-cutting concept, but it just builds in complexity over time.
hmm. One of the things that comes up a lot in the in the podcast is talking about elementary school teachers who may not have a lot of science background. And science
Absolutely.
has this, I mean, we know it's not as complex as people think it is kind of thing. You know, I mean, it's a scary thing, but it's really not.
Hmm.
And one of the things we talked about about you coming on here is about making sense of data that kids get and helping the kids with that, but also helping the teachers. How do they make sense of this? How do they do the sense making stuff? So I'd love to talk a little bit about that and maybe you can talk to elementary school teachers what is the best way to make sense of that kind of data?
Yeah, absolutely. So, elementary school teachers, I think, have an incredibly complex task that they have to do in the course of a day. They have to teach multiple subjects to students that have a lot of varying learning styles and ways that they approach content and different things that help them access their learning. And so, as a teacher, how do you do all of that effectively? It's really kind of a monumental task. I
It's
really do
amazing.
think
Yeah.
elementary teachers are heroic in that
Yeah.
way, that
Me
they can
too.
face the complexity of that task every day.
I could not do that job.
And so, I think it's very normal for someone who's in that situation to be like, oh my gosh, like I have to teach all these subjects, and I'm doing this science lesson, and boy, I don't want to get to the end and have the students misunderstand it and walk away with a different understanding than what was intended.
Hmm.
Um, and so, how as a teacher do you cope with that effectively and set yourself up for success and make sure that you're on a path to help students really develop the conceptual understandings that they're going to need to be successful
Hmm.
and move on to the next level. So I think that part of that is being crystal clear about what it is that you want students to learn from the learning experience that they're going through. And fortunately, I think that if you're working with a strong set of materials like the FOSS materials, that's really well defined for you. So I just took a quick look at one of the samplers from the new FOSS pathways, and that is so awesome. There,
Hmm.
there are some incredible resources there for teachers in terms of supporting their sense making over time. So they're phenomena based storylines. Those storylines are great because they really sort of show you the conceptual flow of how students get from one part of the lesson to the next.
Hmm.
And the storylines are very, very clear about the disciplinary core ideas and the practices and the cross cutting concepts that are involved. So I think the first thing that I would do as a teacher is when I'm looking at that storyline, that I really take a hard look at those DCIs, those disciplinary core ideas, those the end performance expectation I'm trying to get kids to, um, the science and engineering practices, the cross cutting concepts, and make sure I understand those. Like, make sure that I really understand what that's saying and that I'm very clear about it. And one of the ways that I've over time sort of trained myself to look at those is to try to rephrase them in kid language.
Hmm.
So, take that disciplinary core idea, try to reframe it, rephrase it in a way that your students would probably say it back to you
Hmm.
if they understood it. Not necessarily how you would say it to them, but how they would say it to you.
Right.
Because that's what you're looking for, is for them to be able to give you that idea in their own words. And that's when you know that they've really acquired it, right? Um, so that's one way I think that you can really prepare yourself to be successful. I think another thing that folks worry about is that they're going to get to the end, especially when they're doing investigations and students are collecting data. There's always this worry that the data collection is going to go awry, and maybe they're going to get data that actually does not support the conclusion that you want them to come to in the end. So I think that there are a couple things you can do with that. One is, I think, just to pay close attention, be checking in with student groups as they're collecting their data. And if you notice that one or more groups are off, look for what the error might be.
Hmm.
So is it truly something that's maybe not behaving the way it should be, or is the student maybe not not using their measurement equipment properly? If everyone in the room has got a measure of like 8 millimeters and someone has 87, like there's something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So doing that checking as they're going, I think helps you ensure that you get to the end and they've all got data that makes sense. I think another great learning opportunity is like, let's say you get to the end of the lesson and um, some of the groups have data that supports one conclusion and some of the groups have data that supports another conclusion. That's a fantastic learning opportunity because that happens in science sometimes. So when scientists are investigating very complex phenomena in the real world, sometimes you do have conflicting sets of data that seem to point towards different conclusions. And then the challenge as a scientist is to ask yourself, well, how do I figure out which one of these is more supported by the data? I'm going to have to gather more data. And that's always an option in the classroom, is to say, wow, it looks like 3 groups got this and 2 groups got this. Like, kids, what do you think we should do to try to figure out which, are these groups right or are these groups right? That's a great opportunity to also then to go deeper into science practices.
Right. That comes up a lot in the podcast because we talk about how in other subjects, it's very much, this is the thing, do the thing. But with science, it's more like, well, what if this happened or what if that happened? And those kind of things show that it's an ongoing process. And I love that. I think that that's a great opportunity to teach kids that, yeah, the data it's all about the data and how do we get it better? That's awesome.
Absolutely. I had a great second grade teacher once that I worked with multiple times. She was an amazing teacher. And I remember this one moment when she was like, oh my gosh, I can stop worrying about whether I understand all of the science that I need to understand. As long as I can ask good questions, we're going to get where we need to get. And
trust the process.
Trust the process. Ask good questions. Exactly.
Something else I want to talk about. I mean, we love FOSS and we love all the things that it can bring to the table for teachers to use, but we also really like to talk about local context because I think it's important for teachers not necessarily to follow exactly what's going on if they live in an area where they've got something really interesting, rocks or rivers or wherever they live. So can we talk a little bit about that? You're in Colorado, which is one of the most amazing places on the planet. So how can teachers use their local context to help with the cross-cutting concepts and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that, the great thing about applying these concepts to local context is that it gives students something immediate and concrete that they see every day that's part of their normal existence. And one of the things that does is it really shows that science is a part of your everyday world. It's not this thing that happens somewhere else in a lab or in a national park, but something that can be right in your backyard. Right inside your own house. Science is literally everywhere. And so I think a lot of times teachers, especially like if they're teachers that live in an urban area or an area where they might be far away from natural areas like national parks or state forests, feel like, oh gosh, I don't know that there really is much of a local context for examining the natural world. There is nature everywhere. So even if you're in an urban environment, there are going to be plants, there are going to be animals that are out there that you can observe and that you can see what they're doing. And sometimes surprisingly, you see some really interesting interactions. New York City has peregrine falcons, and peregrine falcons have some very interesting behaviors that folks can observe.
Well, Dr. Messier, this has been amazing. It's wonderful to get deeper into that kind of thing, the cross-cutting concepts and the data, which is so important to science and to what we do in FOSS. I think that's great. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It was really wonderful.
Well, it's time for science, and it is time to continue discussing cross-cutting concepts and making sense of data with Leslie Lausten. Leslie is a professional learning specialist for school specialty and was with us back on episode 16, where we chatted about another area of expertise for her, the science of reading. So, Leslie, thank you for being here to continue this discussion.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Really what we wanted to get is we always start with the top, sort of the top level of stuff. Why is sense making, cross-cutting? What do they mean to you? Why are they so important?
So I think sense making is something that many teachers, myself included, do not understand the value of when you are teaching a lesson. I can tell you that when I was teaching fourth grade, I often thought, well, if I just tell them the information, they're going to get it, right? And we know that's not the way it's going to be at all. And so when you think about using sense making, it's not necessarily a sense-making circle or a moment in time. Sense-making in general is going to be your entire focus of your instruction. And so you want to be always thinking about understanding information and transferring it, applying it to something new. And so in a way, it's constructivism at its deepest level. Where they talk about what they're learning and they're constructing knowledge based on the experiences that they are doing in class, the discussions they're having, side conversations with discourse, new information that they're getting when they're reading text, videos, simulations, and then kind of synthesizing it all at the end in some type of summary fashion, where in FOSS we use our science notebooks and our class notebooks to sort of help with all of that.
In the previous interview with Dr. Messier, we were talking about transferring concepts to other contexts, other subjects in school, and how science is such a beautiful bridge for so many different subjects, bringing math and reading, social studies, history, everything together. Can you talk a little bit about that, the importance of that?
Well, now you're speaking my language. So when I was teaching in my school district for many, many years, I started with this idea of sense making in science, but good instruction is good instruction. And so when you follow these tenets of best practices, they do work really well in social studies, math, even ELA, because you want to start off with everything with some type of concrete experience. And that goes back to Piaget, where we know, start off with hands-on first, and then you're going to move into that conceptual level later. And so, yes, I definitely see the value of sense making in all curricular areas.
One of the things we like to focus on here is definitely helping elementary teachers who may not feel comfortable doing science, because science can be very intimidating to some people, I think. So what tips would you give to them for just maybe getting the basics of sense making, cross-cutting? What would you be telling them who want this kind of information?
Well, first of all, I would try to demystify cross-cutting concepts, because I think sometimes people think that they are only for science related. And then when you pull them out and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is cause and effect. This is patterns, comparing and contrasting. This is looking at models, which are really non-linguistic representations. So how can we, how are you already doing that in your other curriculum areas, and how can we transfer that knowledge to science? And usually when they do that, then they're able to see like, oh, this isn't anything different than what I already know is best practice for teaching.
Specifically talking about the FOSS materials, because I know that runs through everything, all the videos I've made, all the things that I've worked with. It's always about sense making, cross-cutting. How does a good curriculum material, how does that help a teacher?
Oh, absolutely. So the beauty of FOSS is that it is all laid out for you, especially our newest version. Pathways really does a nice job in the first day being your day of exploration and your hands-on activity. And then at the same time, you're going to know your standards, right? So you know what it is you want to get out of them. And so with that active learning, we're bringing those connections to the concept or the standard that you're trying to get our students to grasp. And then in our sense-making situations and circles, sense-making circles is what we call them.
It's hard to say.
And our sense-making circles, we do spend more time there with drawing those comparisons to your cross-cutting concepts. So I'm thinking about, I love my hissers, my Madagascar hissing cockroaches, and how when we're making sense of how they survive in the wild, we want to learn about their structures and their functions. And so So when we think about their external structures, we want to think about how they use them to survive. So their legs are used for walking and their antennae are used for sensing the world around them. And so we're looking at those structures and functions in a very meaningful way for kids.
How does it change over time? I mean, obviously you teach kindergarteners different than you would teach high schoolers, but how, as the grades go up, is there how do teachers approach it differently over time?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is, first of all, that it does change over time. I have found that a lot of early childhood teachers, when they think of patterns, they think of math patterns only. And so we have to do some education with teachers to know that patterns is really looking at similarities and differences, and not just a mathematical pattern. And so that's really, I think, the best place to start with early childhood science is looking at comparing and contrasting. But then when you think about comparing and contrasting something with patterns, when you get into the upper grades, you're looking at particle size. You're looking at maybe is it soluble? Is it not soluble? So you're still looking at patterns and comparing and contrasting, but what you're looking at and the properties that you're comparing are going to be a lot different from size, shape, and color in kindergarten to soluble, magnetic, and other properties like that in 4th and 5th grade.
But it's the same foundation, which is something we come back to all the time, that getting the foundations early in kindergarten, 1st grade is so important because it's the same stuff throughout. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And those routines are so important because we talk a lot about, cognitive load of students and how we have a lot of stuff that's coming at our students. And so we use routines so that our students are able to focus on the cognitive task at hand and not so much the routine or the procedure that they're doing. And the same is true for teachers as well. So if a teacher knows the process of sense making, and sense making is going to be the same no matter if they're in kindergarten or 5th grade or 8th grade, they know the routine. All they have to do is change the content to the level of the students that they're at. And then that way they have more time and ability to focus in on what the students know and where they want to get their students.
One of the things I liked that Dr. Messier said was checking in with students as they collect their data so you can fix problems as they occur. If there's a discrepancy in weights, immediately tackling that, not as somebody did something wrong, but why? Why are these two things different? So asking good questions. Can you talk a little bit about how important that is?
Well, yes. So as a coach, one of the first things I talk to teachers about is getting up from behind your desk. If you're sitting behind your desk while your students are exploring, you're missing half of the lesson. And so it's really critically important. FOSS has great guiding questions during the investigation for you to walk around and check in with each of your students or each of your groups. Ask them these guiding questions to clear up any misconceptions that you have. And again, FOSS has taken that already on and off of your plate and already put it into your teacher's guide so that you don't even have to think about it. You just have to get up and walk around and touch base with the students and know what you're looking for.
Let's say a teacher is just getting into the concept of cross-cutting concepts, sense making. What kind of tips do you have to get them started if it's completely new to them?
Well, the best thing we can do is model it for our teachers. Teachers need to go through the process themselves. And so when we do a professional learning, we always have our teachers do the hands-on activity, and then we do our sense-making discussion afterwards, and we debrief with some really important things to think about. First, when you're setting up your classroom, make sure that you have enough space in the room for there to be a place where all of your students can either sit or stand in a circle, depending on the age group. I always say by 3rd grade, they should be standing. K to 2 should be sitting. Make sure you have a place for a class notebook. For some reason, this seems to be one of the hardest things we are noticing for teachers to transfer to. And so we want to make sure that they're using that class notebook to have the students be the ones recording the information on the chart. We can prep it by doing our focus question on there already, maybe even a starting drawing or a started model. And then we want to have the students add their information to that notebook. So we also want to make sure that our students have the opportunity to use discourse in the classroom. If they're not used to being able to freely talk and share ideas, that can be something very difficult to transfer over. So we have to do some coaching and some modeling with our teachers that it is way more important for student talk to be happening than it is for teacher talk to be happening. And I share Hattie's research about really 80% of the talking in the classroom should be the students, 20% should be the adult. So that when they get to the sense-making circle, they're turning and talking first to the person next to them, and then we're sharing out in the big circle. That way, everyone has an opportunity to share their thinking, whether they're sharing with the whole group or not, they're at least sharing with somebody next to them. So first thing first, discourse, let your kids talk. And then second thing, you need to really make sure you have a class notebook to keep recording all those ideas.
I love how that's changed in my life, because in my schooling, it was 100% don't talk and just listen to the adult speak. So,
well, we've learned from Hattie that, we need to make our students thinking visible. And the more that we can make our students thinking visible through talk and drawing and notebooking, the better it is. So very important.
Well, Leslie, I love these kind of conversations about sense making because it seems so important, so foundational for all the teaching. So I just want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I always enjoy being on the podcast.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lipman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the Full Option Science System, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS on Facebook and Instagram.